Warning: the following podcast might be too truthful for most liberals. Listener discretion is therefore advised.
Welcome to the Tea Party Power Hour. My name is Mark Gulag. I'll be your host as we talk to Tim Hale, a 33-year-old Army Reserve veteran who was recently released from jail after spending nearly 3 years incarcerated for nonviolent offenses on January 6th. Tim, welcome to the Tea Party Power Hour. I look forward to talking with you.
Same here. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Now, I want to start by having you tell us a little bit about you before you got caught up in this mess. Obviously, you were probably a Trump supporter, a MAGA person, and you heard Trump was doing something at the White House and you wanted to be part of it. Tell me about you before this, and then tell me how you decided to go to this event.
Well, sure. Thank you. So I'm from New Jersey, born and raised. I've lived my whole life in Jersey. Yeah, I was a Trump supporter. I supported him as soon as he came down those escalators. I actually went to his inauguration to see his parade. You know, there's no getting around. There's like people apparently, a lot's changed in the 3 years I've been locked up. Apparently, like, people are just not friends anymore over the last election. You know, but before that got that bad, yeah, I was and am confident the 2020 election was not legit. And you know, as a citizen, I felt like it was my duty to go down and support him, you know, in DC. But, you know, before that, yeah, I was a Army reservist. I was in the Army for 12 years. I also served, when I call it that, you know, for 3 years as a naval weapons contractor. So I lived on a Navy base. I was the head of the union for that contracting firm. So, I mean, I've had different roles throughout my life. I've done pretty much anything. And, you know, for the most part, under most circumstances, most people would probably consider me maybe not an upstanding citizen, but not a complete degenerate. I am an internet troll. I'm a huge internet troll. I've been trolling people for 20 years since I was a teenager. You know, ever since AOL Instant Messenger made it easy. It's not my fault. I'm the victim. But you know, I mean, I'm kind of a jerk off. I mean, that's pretty much it. You know, for most of my life, I've considered myself an artistic person. Whether it was through comedy or you know, I love satire. So, I mean, when I was in basic training, I used to draw caricatures of my battle buddies and even our drill instructors. And so this is something that's going to play into the story. But yeah, I mean, I am someone who likes to poke the bear. I'm somebody who always likes to, you know, to mess around with people to get a reaction. And so this is something they really screwed me with when it came to my entire story, because the truth is that more people know about the slander I've experienced from the government than they know about my actual conduct at the Capitol. And so if you Google my name, all you're going to see is that I'm some far-right extremist. But in reality, what the government did was they went through my phone. They found some offensive selfies of me from a year before January 6th. I had a Hitler mustache. This is from the COVID era, where I was making ironic pictures and videos about Governor Phil Murphy. I was mocking the police state and the excesses of emergency powers. It's totally lost in translation. I was a wannabe live streamer nobody heard of, and other than that, I was basically a normal person, quote unquote. The government, though, used me, I'm sorry to say, as a Trojan horse, really to demolish the Bill of Rights, because I mean, the First Amendment protected speech has been used now as a means. If you look at case law now, my case is brought up as a way to deprive people of bond. So they've used the First Amendment now as a weapon against the other amendments, the right to bail. This now not only affects January 6th defendants, this is going to, unfortunately, it's now legal precedent. If you give the government an inch, they'll take a mile. And this should be a horrific precedent and legal development for most Americans, no matter what they think about January 6th, no matter what they think about Trump, and definitely regardless of what they think about me. You could think I'm a jerk off. I am, but that's not a crime. And so this is something that people, you know, it's a stupid story. It's a funny story. It's a cringy story, but this is something people should really pay attention to. They're going to come for everybody next. So
I have to tell you, you're not the first person to suggest that what happened during the shutdowns was Hitler-esque. I mean, if you take a look at some of the blue states, especially you take a look at Whitmire in Michigan, for example, there were so many things they did. It's like the power just went to their head. And I haven't seen your drawing, so it's not right for me to pass final judgment on it. But the whole idea that you would draw a picture of Hitler, I have had on more than one occasion liberals take my picture and stick it into a person with a Nazi uniform and put the little Hitler mustache on me. And this is something they're doing to me. And as much as I thought, well, okay, fine, let's call everybody you disagree with a Nazi, you know, that's not really true. I never thought, oh, this person, oh, wow, you know, this could be used against them in a court of law. You know, it just sounds ridiculous that even came up.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's unfortunately, it's the typical Marxist playbook. Accuse others of what you do. Yeah, I mean, absolutely right. I mean, it's not, I'm an independent person. I supported Trump. Well, I don't consider myself partisan, but it really was the case during the COVID craziness. I'm trying to think of more fascistic examples in modern history. You think of maybe like the deep state or the police state, you think of the military industrial complex. But yeah, I mean, the lockdowns in New Jersey, people weren't allowed to attend church. Small businesses were being driven out of business. It was a catastrophe for regular people. And people just had to suck it up because a governor said, I can just do this. And it's totally wrong. And again, the Hitler mustache selfie thing, it goes back to especially one video where I did, if you've been on YouTube, I'm sure you've seen, they're called reaction videos where some reacts to a video they're watching and they record themselves doing it. Mm-hmm. I did that to an interview of Tucker Carlson where he interviews Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey. And he's like, yeah, I get COVID is bad and all, but what about the Constitution? And Phil Murphy's like, oh, Tucker, that's above my pay grade. And it's just like, that's what inspired me. I'm like, above your pay grade, the Constitution, you're a governor.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, and it really, I hate to use the term because it's so overused, but it is Orwellian. We're at a point where the Constitution is considered more of a burden or a speed bump to those in power. And it's just bizarre. Yeah, none of the narratives made sense. On the one hand, I'm supposed to be this fascist, but on the other hand, I was denied bond because an informant recorded me quoting Thomas Jefferson. So am I a radical Enlightenment liberal, or am I a reactionary fascist? None of it made sense. They unfortunately, all they needed was the picture. Honestly, like it was just, and then they were able to make up anything after the facts. And they were able to pressure anybody they needed to corroborate the government's narrative. And it's so bizarre because, I mean, I don't know how into the January 6th stuff you've gotten, but there was a guy in the Capitol building where a woman named Ashley Babbitt was shot, and he was wearing a hoodie that said Camp Auschwitz. Meanwhile, I mean, he got less than a year. I think he got a misdemeanor or whatever. Meanwhile, I was there in a suit and a tie. I went out to Men's Warehouse the night before and got brand new dress shoes. I was there to look as much like a citizen as possible because I was just there for a speech. Meanwhile, you had all these people in costumes and weird attempts to look like caricatures of what people think Trump supporters are.
Are you talking perhaps about the QAnon shaman?
Well, that's one guy. I mean, I don't know him. He seems like he's an okay person. I'm just saying, like, it's the narratives. I'm not saying he went there for malicious purposes. I'm not trying to throw shade at that guy in particular. I'm just saying they focus on people in costumes because they don't want to show you all the weird gray matter people who are doing suspicious things in the background. There's a lot of infiltration that happened that day. And unfortunately, people like me were locked up. And, I have an analytical mind. When I'm not being a D-bag, I'd like to think I'm quasi-intelligent. And so I'm very good at pattern recognition. And so when I look at some of the video, it's very clear that there were agent provocateurs in the crowds. There was incitement there, and there were absolutely undercover federal officers there. The question is what agency, but a lot of those cops even on their own videos are like, they set us up. And the question is, who's they? Because the Capitol Police answered to Nancy Pelosi and the Metro Police answered to Mayor Bowser. So they turned down support from Trump. So who really set the police up and who set the crowds up? It wasn't Trump. Trump didn't make me do anything.
And Nancy Pelosi's daughter just happened to be there that day with the film crew.
Yeah, there's that.
If you remember that.
You know,
let me get back to your experience. You're there for the speech. You're in a suit and tie, for crying out loud. You're not dressed like one of the crazy people. And you know, and they were there, but you're there. You hear Trump speak. Did you stick with Trump until the end of his speech?
I didn't stick in, you know, this is where I have to be honest. I didn't stick with him all the way till the end.
Okay.
I listened to most of it. But, you know, I have videos that I've released off my phone, and you can see that there are caravans of people who are starting to leave. And Trump says, oh, we're going to go down and peacefully protest. It's like, okay, you know, they take Trump completely out of context where he says, you got to fight like hell.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not saying you have to fight the cops or overthrow the government. He specifically says peacefully protest. And then later in the day, he says, go home. You know, it's like, but yeah, I mean, then this is the funny thing is just there's so much video I had on my phone showing people had no idea there was going to be a thing at the Capitol. You're actually hearing the background of one of my videos. There's some kind of march going on. People didn't even know about that. So there was caravans of people walking to the Capitol. And so, you know, it's interesting. I'm sure you've heard of Ray Epps by now. That's become like a household name.
Yeah, they just gave him a slap on the wrist for basically inciting a riot, but go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, well, thank God they got one of the good ones, right? Yeah, he...
You know what that's all about. Oh, we're sorry, Ray, but damn it, everybody spotted you in those videos. And unfortunately, man, you're going to have to do some time because we're catching so much damn heat over this. Everybody knows you're a Fed. Everybody knows you were there to stir things up. Everybody knows you were there to entrap. If we don't throw your ass in jail for just a little while, you know, they're going to burn the damn place down next time. So sorry, Ray.
Do it. Deniability.
Yeah, do it for your
country.
You know it. It's like so. Ray, do it for your country, man. You got to go to jail. I mean, that's such BS. So, I mean, who knows where they end up sticking
They didn't
him.
even do that. Honestly, like that's the funniest thing. They couldn't even commit to that. They gave him a year of probation and community service, and it's just like it's so they really. I mean, honestly, at some level, they really don't care because everybody knows. They're just at this point where they have to go through the motions. But I mean, like, and that's the thing. And this is where it impacts people like me is I showed up a half hour after Ray Epps and his goons knocked over barriers. I didn't know that happened. Most people didn't know that. And so while I absolutely know like, there were Antifa, there were informants, and there were provocateurs in the crowds, and there were agitators, the majority of people probably had no idea they weren't allowed to be there. I have video of me standing in the crowd on the West Terrace, and people are singing "God Bless America." You know, it's like nobody knew it was off limits. There were signs that said it was off limits. Those signs were cut down, and then the barriers, like I say, were knocked over a while before most people showed up. And so when you see these caravans of people going from the ellipse, it is thousands and thousands of people who are walking into a trap. They have no idea. And keep in mind, I'm trying to be fair to the Capitol Police. There was a lot of excessive force. They were incompetent. A lot of them injured themselves because they didn't know how to use their own equipment. But I want to be fair. A lot of them were just doing their jobs, and they were reacting to agitators along the bike rack perimeter they set up. So it's just like it was the perfect storm. The average American, unfortunately, has been misled for 3 years. They haven't seen the videos that are really available. And you have the fake news out there who use the same 20-second clips over and over again on loop for 3 years. It doesn't excuse what everybody did that day. I do think we were entrapped, but it's important to have, I think, a balanced view of what actually happened that day. A lot of people like myself were prior military or law enforcement, and they jumped into action, not to fight the cops actually, but in fact, actually to help people who were injured. And, I'm not Rambo, but, in the Army, you take a class called Combat Lifesaver. It's a natural instinct. It's a natural instinct, I think, for most people who believe in service to care about injuries that happen to civilians. And so there was animosity that built gradually and then exponentially toward what people viewed as excessive force from the police. And it was excessive force. And again, it was compounded by the fact that there were agitators constantly trying to incite the cops to attack the crowd. And those guys, funny enough, nothing really happened to them. It was little old Susie that gets the flashbang thrown at her. They're flashbang grenades that are thrown into the center of the crowd, not at a particular agitator. Entire crowds, teenage girls, like people are doused in spray. And of course, the cops even themselves, especially the Metro PD, I will say this. The Capitol Police, I think, were mostly caught off guard. It was the Metro PD especially that escalated things into a riot because they did not care at all. They actually joke about it on their cameras. They don't care. And they knew that for every one person, by their own accounts, they created 10 more. By every person they attacked, they created 10 more angry people. And so, again, it's not to say that rioting is justifiable if you get mad, but it is to say that psychologically speaking, the Metro PD really had a hand to play in January 6th, going from a protest with some agitators to a full-blown riot. The Metro PD also, again, they injured a lot of them injured themselves. I have video of them spraying each other because they're not listening to their own chain of command. They're saying, don't spray. The wind is blowing in our direction. Don't use those canisters. They do it anyway. These guys had tunnel vision. They were seeing red. And I understand why some of them would have. But this is just something that's not taken into consideration. I mean, something like that, yeah, there was an element to January 6th that was totally planned by the feds. But then there's also another aspect. They often say never attribute to malice what can be attributed to human stupidity. That's still true, too. It was like Murphy's Law, the day. Anything that can go wrong will. And that happened. And their own internal reports acknowledge this.
Okay, so let's go back to you. You're leaving Trump's speech a little ahead of schedule. Did you at least hear the part about let's protest peacefully and patriotically? Did you hear that part?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I was with the crowd. I mean, look, I was even live streaming it after I left on my phone because I mean the signal wasn't so bad. It was when you got to the Capitol when your signals started dropping. But yeah, I mean, I was just goofing around on, I think it was Constitution Ave or whatever. I mean, I have videos of me dancing to the YMCA song. I was not in a rush to go to the Capitol building. People actually, it's kind of, funny is not the word. It's surreal when you actually, if you can really look at the videos. I'm trying to post as many on Twitter as I can, but I'm posting my videos. It's just like the crowd is calmly walking. They're meandering even, at a very slow pace. Nobody's in a rush. It's not war. It's not an insurrection. People are just they're following everybody else.
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask you. How do you feel every time you hear some left-wing news outlet talk about the insurrection on January 6th?
Charge someone with it.
Yeah.
You didn't even charge the guy who literally was telling people to go in the Capitol building. So, I mean, you had one guy, you had one chance, you blew it. It's like, sorry, you don't get to, it's just, like I said, I hate to use the word Orwellian, but I mean, it's double speak, it's newspeak. Words have no meaning anymore. And people, I get into arguments with trolls who think they're going to out-troll me. They can't. And, and they think, oh, you're insurrectionist traitor. And I was just like, well, words have meaning. Here's what this means. And you're wrong. And they're like, oh, you're arguing semantics. It's like, well, yeah, but you need to. When it comes to laws, the common law system requires semantics to some extent.
I agree.
It's just, you're destroying people's lives. I'm fortunate that I'm kind of like a bum. I don't have a wife or kids, but a lot of those guys I was locked up with, they have families. These guys, even if someone made a mistake that day, whether they were incited or whether they were entrapped, if someone, nobody should be doing 20 years for being in a building or for or for talking crap in a text message or something like that. I mean, this is really, like I said, this is a horrific legal precedent. And it's just, for the audience, keep in mind, and again, I'm not a partisan person here. I want to have some perspective. The feds used to target the left a lot we'll just say the left, broadly speaking, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the labor movement, so the pendulum can always swing back in the other direction. So what you do to Trump supporters today can absolutely come back to bite you in the ass. This is not okay for any American citizen to deal with. Families have been destroyed. Homes have been lost. Careers destroyed, businesses lost, but more than any material loss, because man is a spirit and not just flesh. You're destroying human beings and depriving them of their freedom. And it's one thing to say you should have to pay a fine. It's one thing to say you should have to do community service. It's another thing to say, well, you're on probation. But to take years and years out of a man's life over that. I mean, again, I'm not saying everybody should just, walk away, wash their hands of what they did, but context matters. Proportionality matters. True justice has to be proportional. People can't even get trials half the time. I mean, if the left truly, we just had Martin Luther King Day recently. If the left truly values civil rights, let's just remember, an injustice to one is an injustice to all. Justice delayed is justice denied, and injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. People really believe that. They have to apply that equally to everybody and not just to other leftists.
Alan Dershowitz has been trying to get the left to understand that, but I don't think they do. It's really sad because you're right. You go back to the 60s and you look at all the anti-war protests and the civil rights protests, and the left wasn't too happy with law enforcement. The left wasn't too happy with the government. And now it's just kind of strange to see how the whole thing is kind of flipped on its head. But I want to get back to you. You're at the Capitol. How do you enter the Capitol, and what do you do once you get inside?
So this is kind of interesting, is that we had to really, I hate to say it, we kind of had to put my defense together piecemeal because of how much discovery and evidence was withheld from me. So, I mean, here's what happened. There are these scaffolds, like these under construction scaffolds or whatever, that are on the west side of the terrace, which is where most of the action went down. And it's also basically a bridge to the area where the Capitol building was breached. And so these scaffolds, it's a bottleneck, basically. If you go in them, you can't get back out because of how many people there are. And so in front of those scaffolds, I was helping people who were injured on the ground. Some dude who didn't know he was a thing. Apparently he's a journalist. He sticks a microphone in my face, tries to interview me. They're in the middle of all this, so I'm caught off guard. Keep in mind, I haven't slept in like 2 days, full of adrenaline from what's going on. A lot of it just happens very quickly, but I end up getting in this scaffolding. And this is, my recollection is, it's to get away from all the spray and from all the shooting. But I have video that I got after I was convicted in trial, and it shows me trying to leave the scaffold. There's this, it's actually kind of stupid, honestly. It's a little embarrassing. This is just how out of it I was. I told you that the scaffolding was under construction. So there's this door frame. It's just a door frame. There's no wall around it. But I open the door to walk through the door frame like an idiot, like it's a cartoon or something like that. Like I'm, like I'm Wile E. Coyote trying to walk through a hole that's painted on the wall. But anyway, I go through the scaffold and I try to leave. And it's just kind of funny, but eventually you can't get out. And so when the crowd starts forcing its way up the scaffolding, they end up going up. I guess I can't remember what there's like. They have these ridiculous like directional names for every square inch of the Capitol. But there's this staircase that ends up taking you up towards where the Capitol building is. And I actually stop on video in the middle of it so I could pick up a little American flag. So again, I'm clearly not rushing to get to the Capitol building. I'm following the crowd, but at the end of the day, I have no idea really what I'm doing. I have a concussion on top of this. I mean, it's like I stop, I pick up a flag, and then eventually I meander to the top of the staircase. Before this happens, though, people break a window in. They breach the Capitol building. This is the area, it's camera 0102. It's called the Senate wing door area. This is where the Capitol building is initially breached. A bunch of people get in there and they end up kicking the doors open. So by the time I show up, I walk through a pair of open doors. And so at that point, again, I have no idea what I'm doing, where I am, why, like what we're supposed to be doing. But the adrenaline drops. So at that point, now that we're away from the Metro PD, I don't really feel like I'm under fire. So I'm just kind of like, okay, and I just kind of check out. And so I'm walking around the hallways, and you can see me. I go left, and then I come back, and I go right, and I go back. So I just I end up in an area called the Crypt. And it's basically just this area with a bunch of statues in it. So I'm on video. I'm taking selfies with statues. Someone put a Trump flag in some statue's hand. I hold it up. Someone takes a picture. So, I mean, it's funny stuff. It's actually ridiculous that you could call this an insurrection, because for the vast majority of people, this was like an unguided tour, basically. On the second floor, I wasn't in the rotunda, but I have video. People who are walking through velvet ropes like they're in a museum. They're looking at statues and all this stuff. And it's just like, most of these people are just regular tourists. And it's just be insane. They've been treated it's like an inquisition. They have been hunted down from across the country for taking selfies in a public building. That if it was, again, I hate to, it's kind of a logical fallacy to do whataboutism, but in terms of the 14th Amendment and equal protection, whataboutism actually matters. BLM was not treated this way. Antifa is not treated this way. Those environmental radicals who rioted in D.C. a year or so ago, they weren't treated this way. Code Pink wasn't treated this way. So it's important to people understand, too, like the worst scenes of violence you saw at the Capitol were outside the Capitol building. They were on the grounds. They were by the Lower West Terrace Tunnel. They were very specific areas. It really was not violent inside the Capitol building. You had some interesting, I'm going to call them photo ops inside the Capitol building. I just posted some video where I'm just like, does anyone find it weird that there are like 5 photographers here in the corner with the police waiting for people to show up? Like this, this is one, by the way, this is one of the reasons. There's 2 reasons they don't want to, there's 3 reasons they don't want to release all the CCTV. And again, not a partisan person. I had expectations. I was hopeful about this new Speaker Johnson, but he promised he would release the video, and they're not doing it. And right. So I think I'm releasing more video than Speaker Johnson. The video is not being released for 3 reasons. 1, because they don't want defendants to be able to fight their cases. 2, because it will expose feds in the crowd. That's why they're trying to blur people's faces. And 3, honestly, I think it's just going to do, even without the Fed aspect, I think it would just totally demolish the insurrection narrative. Tucker Carlson did, I think he did a service by releasing some of those videos he got, to show that it was, again, what's his name? The Buffalo guy was just walking around. That's true, but not everybody that was, but that we need to show that for everybody who wasn't there dressed like a buffalo. That's most people who were in the Capitol building who were charged with a felony, obstruction of an official proceeding, which is a fake crime. Most of the people who walked around inside the Capitol building, no matter what they were dressed as, did nothing wrong. And so, yeah, okay, you instead of 18 USC 1512, give them 40 USC something or another. Picketing, give them the picketing charge. It's a misdemeanor. Give them trespassing. That's one thing. But to give people a felony that originates with the Enron scandal for destroying documents, or even further than that, goes back to the 80s with tampering with witnesses. This is an insane legal precedent. And so now it's in front of the Supreme Court, that 1512 charge. It should be tossed out because it's unconstitutional, or at least it's overly broad in how it's being applied. And that's another thing. I hate to keep throwing shade like I've been doing. I'm trying to cut back. I'm trying to be a nice boy. The January 6th community likes quote unquote unity, but just have to say this. The 1512 charge was first upheld in the district court for 2 defendants who were actually at the Capitol because they were caught in drug conspiracies in 2020. And one of them confessed this. And so it's just like, and I met them in the jail. I'm a witness to this. So if that's true, if the first time the obstruction charge was upheld in federal court was for federal informants, doesn't that make this all look like it's just a smokescreen, like it's just a show? It makes it look like they did this not just to stop people from questioning the election in 2020, but now that it's being applied to President Trump, the 1512 charge kind of looks like this was a long-term plan to destroy President Trump. It makes it look like they used this all as pawns, as weapons against President Trump. And so
Considering that there are all these cases against Trump that seem to be coordinated by DAs who were supported financially by George Soros or some NGO that was funded by George Soros, I don't think what you're proposing is out of line at all. And I think you made an excellent point about BLM, Antifa, Code Pink. Those people can do whatever they want to, and the DOJ just says, no problem. And as far as the insurrection goes, I've been telling this to people on X, formerly Twitter, for a long time. If the right, and I know you said you're nonpartisan, but I'm not, if the right wanted to have an insurrection, they would have brought guns, they would have brought weapons, and given the incompetence of the law enforcement that was there that day, they would have won. So, I mean, the whole idea that people go after the government and try to have an insurrection using pointed flagpoles and, whatever, rocks. It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, very few people had guns that day, and the ones that did had them back in their hotel room. And it's just, the whole thing is absolutely ridiculous. It is an example of the left saying, just like with the election, we're going to do this. Stop us if you can. I mean, this is a clear abuse. Now, what I want to ask you, because I do know that there's some people who went into the Capitol, took a couple of selfies, walked out, and they only got 2 to 3 months, maybe 6 months in jail. And that's because they were not charged with 1512C2, which is a felony. How do the feds, Tim, seem to be distinguishing between who's going to get a slap on the wrist with a couple of months in jail, 3 months in jail? I know there was a doctor that just got a few months in jail. And someone like yourself who gets hit with 1512C2. How do they make that distinction?
I could say it's totally arbitrary, and it's based on what kind of a deal you can get in terms of a plea. I obviously went to trial. So, I mean, you get what's called a trial tax. It's not officially a thing, but if you look at sentencing guidelines, the way it works is this. If you take a plea deal, you get a 3-point reduction in terms of how you're calculated. If you go to trial and you testify on your own behalf and you're found guilty, they basically will say that you lied. So that's a 3-point enhancement. So that's a 6-point difference between someone who goes to trial and is found guilty by a biased DC jury versus someone who bends the knee and takes a plea deal. And by the way, I'm not criticizing everybody who's ever taken a plea deal. I have friends in the jail who took plea deals because it just, they bit the bullet because they wanted to get back to their families. So I understand that. I mean, if we're being perfectly honest, like, I'm from New Jersey. In New Jersey, people get citations all the time for stupid crap that doesn't exist. They plead guilty because they know they got to pay a ticket at the window and it's have a nice day. I get it. But what they've done with this is totally beyond the pale. The truth is, but with me, though, I was actually sentenced to over twice my federal guidelines, over twice my guidelines. I should have gotten time served at the time of sentencing. My judge made the decision, though, that basically I'm a bad boy because I say mean things in my, my text message or something like that. Basically, it was the Hitler narrative. That's really what it boiled down to. It didn't matter what I actually did. And you look, okay, I shouldn't have been in the Capitol building, but I didn't deserve 4 years for it. Fortunately, Donald Trump, he did support the First Step Act. And so for a lot of January 6th defendants, if they don't have certain charges, they will do, less time. Otherwise, I would have had to do 85% of my full sentence. But I mean, I'll just be frank. And again, I don't want to keep delving on this because people don't like to hear it. There were informants. And so there were inmates that I was in the DC jail with who were informants, and they were snitching on me the entire time I was there. And so they were actually publishing hit pieces about me through NPR. I'm sure you've heard of NPR. It's
Yes.
It's government funded leftist propaganda. And whatever, if you're into that sort of thing, okay. But basically, there are ways for people to snitch without ending up on someone's paperwork. And so about a half dozen Antifa inmates that I was with wrote hit pieces, smear pieces about me in NPR. NPR didn't reach out to them. They reached out to NPR. I don't know many Trump supporters who would do that.
Right.
And so they go to NPR. They basically corroborate everything the government said. He's goose stepping throughout the whatever, or whatever they say. And it's like, like what one person said, oh, it was like Mean Girls, the movie Mean Girls, where I'm basically trying to say I'm a bully, therefore I'm a threat to society. And this was cited. I actually posted the transcripts, or at least a segment of it, from my sentencing hearing. They literally cited these public reports in order to justify an upwards departure from my sentencing guidelines. The government was asking for 6 years. The judge gave me 4. So, I mean, and I'm not trying to talk crap about my judge. I think that it seems to be the case that typically the judges they usually meet in the middle between what people ask in terms of defendants versus what the DOJ is asking for. So he gave me basically, he still gave me over twice my guidelines. My guidelines were 20 months. I got 48 months. So, but he didn't give me the 6 years or 7 years, whatever it was that the government was asking for. But I think, my case is scary. I don't think it necessarily represents all of them, but I will say absolutely there is serious overcharging for certain people. I think that has to do with what the feds think they can get away with. I also think it has to do with narratives. They love the idea of promoting Trump supporters as all Nazis. So, but I can't even say that too. It's bizarre because one of the guys I was with, he was very kind. His name was Mike Curcio. He was a member, he did 7.5 years for first-degree attempted murder in Florida. The story is not what people might initially think. But, unfortunately, he had to go to prison and he had to join a certain gang. He's very open about it. And that means he had certain tattoos. They knew this. They used it against him to deny him bond, but he still got a 6-month misdemeanor plea. So, and then I told you about the Camp Auschwitz dude who wore a hoodie, basically a pro-Holocaust hoodie. It's very weird how the Nazi narrative is weaponized for certain defendants and not others. I don't know why. I think it has to do with what works at the time. Some people pled out earlier than others too, and they got better plea deals. So honestly, it's not right, but I'm not sure what the correct answer is in terms of why everybody gets this or that. Some of the Oath Keepers, for instance, got different sentences than each other. Ken Harrelson, who's getting out soon, he got 4 years. Jessica Watkins got 8. Kelly Meggs got 12. None of it seems to make sense. I think it's just a way to I think that certain people have more that can be used against them to destroy them in front of a jury and to justify certain judges making certain, we'll just say, politically correct rulings. That's what I think. And again, there are informants who are just playing a part too. So we have to take that into consideration. Some people are only in the courtroom as actors.
Now, one of the things I want to make sure we get clear on for the people who are listening is the entire time you were there on January 6th, you never vandalized anything.
No.
Okay.
No, I didn't assault anyone. I didn't break anything.
That was my next question. Did you assault an officer of the law at any point? No,
I didn't assault anybody. Like I said, I didn't steal anything. I didn't break anything. I was basically just a dork. They tried. I mean, they threw everything they could at the wall to see what would stick. But I mean, I wandered around the Capitol aimlessly. I took pictures with statues. I danced in the Capitol Visitor Center. I know, right? Meanwhile, talking about disparities, there's a known FBI informant named James Knowles. He infiltrated the Proud Boys, and he was behind one of the breaches between Crypt Lobby East and the Capitol Visitor Center. And he was never charged, but the Proud Boys he was with, they did get charged. And it's just interesting because someone like me could have never made it into the Capitol Visitor Center in the first place if he hadn't broken the door open. Right. So it's interesting how people who are instigators, motivators, agitators, how people who open the floodgates for other people. It's just interesting the disparity between that and people who wandered in. And again, I'm not an angel. I'm kind of a jerk off, but is it worth 4 years of someone's life? And that's a rhetorical question. The answer is no. But, this doesn't just apply to me, though. It's just, and in some ways, even though I got an upward variance, I did walk away kind of lucky compared to some other men who unfortunately have worse sentences and are still in prison. I met a lot of good people who are just suffering in silence, and they don't get to do interviews like this. Unfortunately, nobody cared about them when they were, still in the DC jail, and now that they're in the BOP, the Bureau of Prisons, they're not even allowed to do interviews. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk about this, because I do want to speak up on their behalf as well. There's a lot of lives that have just been put on hold at best and destroyed at worst. And this is, like I said, a terrible precedent to set in this country. We look like a banana republic.
Indeed, we do. I mean, if you can't exercise free speech in America without getting thrown in jail for a few years, then we do look like, in fact, it's not that we look like one, we've become one. Now, let's talk a little bit about the future for Tim Hale. Hopefully, Donald Trump will get reelected. He'll pardon everyone from J6 and your record will be expunged. But what has this done to you? I mean, are you going to be able to find work? Are you going to be able to support yourself? How has this personally impacted your life in terms of the future? How is it limiting you?
Well, there's theory and there's reality. In theory, no one's supposed to be able to discriminate against you in hiring practices for being a felon, I guess. But I mean, the truth is that even more than being a felon, because if you really think about it, like, it's the norm now for a large percentage of the population to have been incarcerated at some point, that just goes to show you maybe that Banana Republic thing is truer than fiction. But, even besides that, if someone Googles my name, all they're going to see is Nazi sympathizer. They're not going to see comedian. They're not going to see smartass satirist. They're not going to see veteran of 12 years. They're not going to see anything like that. So it's something I have to get over. And so I'm doing that now, I suppose, with, interviews like this. But, it's an uphill battle. But life is an uphill battle. I can't feel sorry for myself or feel bad about it. It's just, honestly, the thing I'm more concerned about than myself, like I said, is getting the word out after 3 years. Because, a lot of people, interesting people will say, have been doing interviews about January 6th for 3 years. And it's just weird how you can do an interview from solitary confinement. You know what I'm saying? So now that I'm actually out, I'm glad I can speak out about the people I know that were solid or the people I know who've suffered. But I guess that's really my focus right now, is just getting the word out about what really happened that day and how many people have been impacted. As a union rep, I was always willing to fall on a sword for others. And the same was true, I guess, as a sergeant in the Army. I don't want to get a big head about it, but I just feel like there are so many false messiahs that have been based around January 6th. So many people try to use it as a platform to get famous and stuff like that. And I find it really gross. Because, if who we are is who we are, like if we're honest about who we are, if we really are who we are, we're nobodies. We're nobodies who walked into a trap. We're not celebrities. And so I don't like how people have built huge platforms on January 6th to promote themselves as this, cartoon character, this caricature. If you have a platform for January 6th, you should use it to raise awareness. And I guess that's what I want to try to do. I got a few followers on Twitter or whatever. I'm trying to put the video out that's been withheld. I'm trying to, put narratives, counter narratives about, the guys that I was locked up with, so people realize they're not these monsters they've been accused of being. And it's not easy, but I did bond with a lot of those guys. And so I know their stories. And instead of doing interviews for 3 years, I worked on my case. Those of us who were solid worked on our cases. That's why the public hasn't heard from us. We were busy. And so I know a lot of details about these guys, and I know a lot of details about what they've suffered through, and I know a lot of details about what the government's lied about. And so I guess that's really my priority right now. It would be great to be rewarded for being a political prisoner, but it's not my prerogative right now. My prerogative is just getting the truth out and helping those guys, because no one else is going to.
Now, you just triggered something with me. I forgot to ask you for a few details about your time in prison. I know that you were in solitary confinement for a year, and you for 23 hours a day for walking through the Capitol and taking a few selfies. There are Antifa people that could smash a cop in the face and not do 10% of the time you did, if any time at all. So my question is, talk to us about prison. I mean, Cynthia Hughes was here, and she was saying that some people would be given sandwiches that didn't even have meat in them. They would not be taken care of. In your case, you had an infection in your ear, which they didn't treat, which led to a hearing loss. I mean, there was a considerable amount of suffering there given the crime. It sounds to me like you guys were thrown in some kind of third world gulag. Talk to me about that from day one. What was prison like? I heard they moved you all over the place too.
Yeah, the marshals hopped us around the country. So I was transported between two jails in New Jersey. And then they brought me to New York to fly on Con Air to Oklahoma. Was in a county jail there for one night. Then they flew us all the way to West Virginia. They drove us to Northern Neck, Virginia jail. And then after a week there of quarantine, they brought us back. Well, they brought us to Washington, D.C. to be in the D.C. jail, which, as you alluded to, they call it the D.C. Gulag. Some call it D.C. Gitmo. But it's not quite Guantanamo Bay, but it's certainly not American. And so here's what I'll say about that. The guards there, take this with a grain of salt. The guards there, I alluded to the 1512 thing being planned ahead of time. The guards, once they mellowed out and they grew somewhat partial to us, they confessed that the cells we were in were cleared out for us weeks before January 6th.
I've heard
they
that.
knew that they knew people would be being put there. So I heard that myself. I can confirm that that's a thing. Again, take it with a grain of salt. It's anecdotal evidence, I guess, which legally would be hearsay, but that's a thing. So, and there are two segments of the DC jail. CDF, which is Central Detention Facility, and CTF, which is Central Treatment Facility. We were in CTF, which is essentially an insane asylum. I mean, people can call it whatever they want, but it was a madhouse. So I've always joked that the DC jail is a cross between an insane asylum and an FBI field office. Because if it wasn't the psychological torture of solitary or being deprived of civil rights, it was the fact that you were being informed on 9 times out of 10 by a third of the people who were there posing as Trump supporters. So you had initially COVID-19 was used as an excuse to deprive us of pretty much every constitutional right we're supposed to have. As an aside, we were pre-trial detainees. And so what that means is you might have been detained because you've been called dangerous or whatever made up reason, but you're still supposed to have access to any constitutional right a regular citizen has. The only difference is that you can't leave where you're detained at. So we're supposed to have religion. We're supposed to have First Amendment rights. We're supposed to have this, that, and the other thing. We did not. They used COVID-19 to get around that. And so you were not allowed to have religious services. You were not allowed to see your attorney. You were not allowed to get your evidence or your discovery so you could work on your case. You were not allowed, they did not give us basic medical treatment, as you alluded to. They did not give us visitation to family. And at the start, you might think, well, COVID applies to everybody. It did at a certain point, but also at a certain point that stopped. It started being an equal protection violation. It was a 14th Amendment thing because other inmates throughout the DC jail were allowed to go to church or mosque or whatever they did. They were allowed to see their families. Half the time when they did eventually start letting people see lawyers, they wouldn't let the lawyers in the building. I mean, you might have heard they famously would not allow Marjorie Taylor Greene and literal U.S. congressmen to come inside the building one day.
Yes.
Well, they did that the same day they turned my own attorney around. So it's not a unique thing. So, and it's funny enough, I got maybe 6 hours of trial preparation after 16 months of incarceration. Like my lawyer, they kept getting turned away. So I literally had to sneak meetings with my lawyer during the week of trial. I mean, this is how they sabotage cases. And I'm not saying that happens to everyone all the time. Again, I do think that the jail mellowed out eventually, but people need to understand, again, this is all about precedent. I left after 2 years and I was on the Fort Dix prison for a year. So my story cuts out the last year of my incarceration when it comes to the DC jail. But I can tell you, things did improve to an extent. We weren't always 23-1. Eventually it lowered to 22-2. And then eventually we were out for 5 or 5.5 hours. And eventually, because like I said, the guards The guards took it very personal January 6th. So there was a lot of hostility towards us initially. They thought we were all white supremacists. They hated Trump. Over time, some of them mellowed out. So there was one in particular who basically, he worked a lot of overtime. So he would let us out of our cells basically all day if he could. So I don't want to suggest, again, I don't like it when if we don't want to be painted with a broad brush, we can't do the same thing. None of those guards were bad people. Some of them, they had misconceptions, and with time, they kind of got warm to us. Not all of them. The warden, actually, one of the wardens was fired, and she despised us. So she screwed with us all the time. And so she actually had anti-Trump stuff all over her social media. I mean, so at some level, you have to wonder, like, what's coming down from the DOJ versus what is just the DOC. It's hard to tell, but some of it is not a coincidence. That thing about clearing out the jail, that's not a coincidence. And I know that not getting access to our lawyers had to be a part of the DOJ's strategy, as well as the fact that they were clearly listening to legal calls. I can't get into the specifics of that because it would identify certain defendants, but I know from being with the guys I was with that things they were telling their lawyers were popping up in what the DOJ prosecutors were doing. And yeah, you want to call it a third world country, a second world country, like communist, whatever. At the end of the day, what happened in the DOJ wasn't just bad because of the solitary. It was really all of the civil rights that you would expect anyone accused of anything, being entitled to, us being deprived of it. And again, it was political, it was partisan, it was weaponized, and it never should have happened. I don't know if that answers your question really, but I mean that there's so many different examples, and a lot of it is petty. If you really think about like smaller things, guards coming in and saying they're going to move us to Gen Pop to have us stabbed. I mean, threats, petty things. But there have been times when guards at least threatened the public welfare, the general welfare of the inmates. There have been times when we've been locked down over nonsense, manufactured claims by guards. And then there were a lot of instances. I mean, again, I have to keep coming back to this because I lived through this for years. There were a lot of agitators with us there, just like at the Capitol. And so there were guys who tried to incite riots to get us locked down and screw us over. That happened. And so if it wasn't from the jail, it was from Antifa. And this is a part of the story the average person just has no idea about. And I don't blame the public, but this is why only certain people have had access to the media for the past 3 years. It's because it is a controlled narrative. There is controlled opposition in all of this. And so, thank God I get to finally talk about it.
One of the things I heard is that they really liked jacking with people emotionally. If you had a hearing coming up or something of that, some type of legal proceeding coming up, they would cancel it that day for no reason. There were people that hadn't seen their families in forever because their families were over 1,000 miles away. The families would show up on the scheduled visitation day and they'd say your visitation's canceled without giving any reason. They enjoyed screwing with the inmates and their families emotionally. They were trying to inflict additional emotional harm on top of the prison time. The prison time apparently wasn't enough. They needed to mess with your family, mess with your mind in order to inflict more pain. What can you tell me about that? Are you aware of any stories like that among the people you
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, I could expound a little bit about that. I mean, yeah, here's an example. I talked about how COVID was used as a reason to deny people of, basic humanity.
Right.
Some of the inmates, and I'm not an anti-vaxxer per se, but I don't think that you should have your rights held hostage over vaccines. So one of the things they did was they told us, we could have religious services or we could do this or that if we got vaccinated. And so some people got vaccinated so they could get family visits, and then they were denied after they got vaccinated. So, whoops. I mean, they would hoodwink people all the time. Well, if you guys are good boys, then we'll let you do this. And it never happened. Eventually, it eventually started, like I say, mellowing out because of how the individual COs, the guards on duty in our pod, started treating us. But the jail itself, never really started. It never really wanted to treat us on an equal footing as those throughout the other parts of the jail. But yeah, I mean, fortunately, yeah, people did start to be able to see their families. But I mean, by that point, there was a guy I was in there. I mean, there are guys whose kids forgot what they looked like because they hadn't seen their fathers in so long.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, and you have people, unfortunately, the entire time they've been in there, they never got to see their families. Yeah, because like what you said, they might have been so far away, or because they were turned away. That happened, you know, and again, it happened for lawyers as well. Not that that's as emotional, but I mean, yeah, if you're working on your case and you're about to go to trial, you might want to be able to sit down with your lawyer. And there's just other things. You know, it wasn't quite a gulag in the sense you might think of Stalinist Russia, but I wasn't able to get a haircut for 16 months.
Wow.
My hair, I was in the military my whole adult life. I'd never had long hair. So I had scabs all over my scalp from, you know, the inability to, you know, maintain my hygiene. You know, I had my hair, I'd never had long hair. It was down to the back of my neck. I looked like a caveman. And so this is just something you had people who snuck, you had people who tried to use like certain chemicals to burn the hair off their heads. I mean, that's what people were doing. And it's just in general, it was a huge morale killer to see how other men were being treated too. Like there was a guy, his name was Lonnie Kaufman. You know, you'd mentioned the gun thing. They accused him of having a weapon. He was a 71-year-old Vietnam vet. He didn't bring weapons to the Capitol. He was leaving D.C. and they pulled him over in his truck. And they found that he had some firearms. Apparently, he's an old man from the deep South. And they said that canisters of gas, fuel he had in the back of his pickup or whatever, were Molotov cocktails. It's absolute nonsense. The Vietnam vet, old man, short, frail. His hands were purple. They wouldn't treat him well. They were able to coerce him into a plea deal. He got a 4-year sentence, I think it was. And fortunately, I think he did go to a medical facility once he was sentenced. But, I mean, it was just disheartening. Even Marjorie Taylor Greene was like, holy crap. When she saw his hands, how purple they were, he looked like Barney. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not right. It's not right. And again, for me, a 30-year-old whatever, I can deal with that. I could deal with sleeping on a 1-inch thick mattress. I can deal with a lot of psychological torture because I think I'm not trying to be, you know, I'm not trying to brag here, but I can put up with quite a lot of abuse. But nobody should have to, especially not someone like Lonnie Kaufman. Now, again, he's not just a senior citizen. He's a 71-year-old Vietnam veteran. And if it wasn't the jail, it was Antifa trying to steal his signature so they could sell it. I mean, there's just so much bizarro world, Twilight Zone behavior that we had to deal with on a daily basis. It was a total morale killer, and it's just crazy. We were singing "God Bless America" one evening. It was Scott Fairlamb. He had it was this one guard. He came in because, you know, I started a tradition with a couple other guys early in January of 2021 when the marshals were still moving us around. And we started singing patriotic songs as we were being moved around. It's a little ironic, you know, a little sarcastic, but, you know, it was a way to bond. And so we ended up creating this tradition. It became formalized by the time we were in the D.C. jail, where we sang the national anthem every evening, like around 9 o'clock or whatever. But before it even got to that point, we would just sing songs, and, you know, American songs, period. And so one evening, it was like 11 o'clock, you know, not too late. You know, we're singing "God Bless America." We're locked in our cells, but we're singing it through our doors. It's a show of solidarity with one another. And this guard comes in, and he tells us to shut the up. And Scott Fairlamb's like, yo, dude, we're singing "God Bless America." He's like, America. And we're like, what? He's like, America. And then he goes into Scott Fairlamb's cell, and it gets up to his face, and he threatens to whoop his. Fortunately, Scott's an MMA fighter. He's a giant. You know, it was not a smart move. But I think on some level, yeah, I think they did that kind of stuff because they wanted us to be the animals that they portrayed us as. They wanted us to get angry, and they wanted us to throw down, and they wanted us to be the insurrectionists. It didn't really happen. But I mean, that's just an example. Like, you can't even. A brother, you know, it's like, can a brother just sing "God Bless America" without being threatened with violence? It's like, no, apparently not. I mean, that's just, I mean, that's one example.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to sensationalize things, but I mean, it's just the entire time, it was just one thing after another. And a lot of it was, some of it was big, some of it was petty, but enough petty things over time. It's like it's like an abusive relationship, you know? It's just like, can I leave now? No. All right. Like,
Can we break up?
right. You know, like, it's not me, it's you. You know, it's sorry.
Well, we live in a country, Tim, where kids going to school with American flags on their shirts have been told some students might find that offensive. You need to go home and change. So I'm not that surprised that there would be an anti-American guard in the J6 Gulag, because we're seeing it all over the country. I mean, we've got people not wanting to have flags put on shoes. We've got kids being told to take their shirts off or turn them inside out because it has an American flag on it. There was one school where they had put up the flags and they had put the flag of Mexico higher than the flag of the United States. And this kid got in trouble because he was like, nobody's flag should be higher than the flag of the United States. So he goes back up and climbs up wherever and switches them out. So he gets in big trouble, you know, for school anyway, suspension or whatnot. And that's the country we're living in right now, is that people say that the American flag is offensive to some people and we need to keep it on the down low, because the last thing you want to do in this country is offend somebody. And I could see that guy saying F America. I really could. And the fact that he's working for the federal government, I guess the irony is lost on him that
Absolutely.
that he would say something like that. Well, I don't want to let you out of here without giving a plug to Cynthia Hughes and the Patriot Freedom Project. And I know you and Cynthia are very close. She's a great woman. I enjoyed having her on the show. So for those of you who would like to help the prisoners still in and the prisoners' families, you can go to patriotfreedomproject.com and learn more about how to do that. Because as we talk about, Tim, how you were victimized, how many people still in jail were victimized, there's a second set of victims, and that's the families of these people that were put in the J6 Gulag. And rent has to be paid. Mortgage payments have to be paid. Car payments have to be made. Food has to be purchased. And that's hard to do when the person that's oftentimes the major breadwinner is locked up in jail. And that's what the Patriot Freedom Project tries to help people do. So once again, that's patriotfreedomproject.com. And before I let you out of here, Tim, I said that I wanted this to be you telling your complete story. We've covered a lot of ground today, but is there anything that we've missed that you want to make sure the American people hear? Is there anything at all that you feel like, gee, well, I wish Mark would have asked me this, or I wish Mark would have covered this?
You know, this is probably one of the most in-depth talks I've done about this. I'm glad that we hit a lot of the different points we did. I would just say that if you're interested, and I hate to be the guy to plug stuff, but if people check out my Twitter account, it's at Tim Hale, criminally funny J6er. They will see a lot of the stuff that's been withheld. You'll see videos of photographers who are hidden, waiting for protesters to show up. You will see video of agitators who are planted in crowds, and you'll see internal documents that I have showing that the Capitol Police were getting conflicting orders about who they were supposed to watch out for that day, Trump supporters or non-Trump supporters. So, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. I would appreciate the follow just so you can hear about some of the guys I was locked up with. But before all that, absolutely, patriotfreedomproject.com. You can follow Patriot Freedom Project at Real PFP on Twitter as well. I'm so grateful that you're willing to give that shout out, because those families don't deserve what they're experiencing any more than those defendants do. I really appreciate it.
They do not deserve it. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I hate to keep going back to the Banana Republic thing, but we really look ridiculous in the eyes of the world because of what happened. I mean, you've got the things that Code Pink did, Antifa did, BLM did. And I'll never forget the CNN reporter who was standing in front of a burning building saying that a protest had been mostly peaceful protest. I'm sorry, the J6 was a mostly peaceful protest, not that stuff that BLM and Antifa were doing. So, Tim, love to have you back sometime. When this all gets packaged up, I'm going to send you some things that you can use to get your interview out to people. I'm sure you'd like a lot of people to hear you in this in-depth of an interview. That's kind of what we do here. You go on Fox, you might get 5 minutes, and that's not really enough time to tell the story. So we tell people, take your time, relax. This is a podcast. There are no rules, and you can let people hear your story that way. But once again, thanks for being here, man. It was an absolute honor to have you on the show, and thank you so much for what you're trying to do to help the people that are still in.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an honor to talk to you. And if more people have your mindset, if they have an open mind and they're willing to hear me out, it's my hope that we will help those families. So
absolutely.
Thank you.
Tell
God bless you.
God bless you. Tell Ed and Cynthia I said hi.
I absolutely will.
All right. Thank you.
You got
Bye-bye.
it. Bye.
You've been listening to the Tea Party Power Hour with Mark Gulag.